begin our afternoon program, I'd like to make a few brief announcements. On Monday, May 5th, the club is having a special luncheon for Her Excellency Mara McAleese, the President of Ireland. The club's 75th anniversary annual meeting dinner will be Thursday, May 22nd. Our speaker will be Felix Roatin, the former U.S. Ambassador to France, discussing Europe and America, a troubled partnership. Fifth night promises to be a wonderful evening at the Museum of Science and Industry on Wednesday, June 4th. Members and their families and guests will have the opportunity to enjoy two new exhibits at the museum, The Great Train Story and Toy Maker 3000. I haven't seen them, but I hear both of them are terrific, so it'll be an event not to be missed. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce and welcome the First Lady of Chicago to the podium, Maggie Daley.
It's wonderful to be with you this evening, and it's an honor for me to stand in on my husband's absence. I know he truly wanted to be here, and I happen to be the happy delegate to replace him. Today, Uruguay's efforts in promoting education. I want to talk about the education part of it because I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history, so I should go back to the beginning here, because it is an honor for me to introduce and welcome today's guest. In welcoming him, I am reminded, and this is what I wanted to tell you about, of the warm reception I and the rest of our party received while visiting the beautiful country of Uruguay last spring. Bob Wisla was with us, and we really had a remarkable opportunity during that mission. And we also had the distinct pleasure of meeting President Batlle and his very lovely wife, Mrs. Mercedes Manafra. The warm hospitality expended to all of us was immeasurable and unforgettable. And on our visit, we extended to the President an invitation to visit our great city. And so I am delighted to have him with us today because of that experience. After being elected president in March of 2000, President Batche's priorities have focused on integrating Uruguay into the world economy, increasing international trade, attracting foreign investments, cutting government spending, and enhancing the performance of state and privately owned enterprises. Among other social responsibilities, the President has created the Commission for Peace. As a result, Uruguay, even though it's one of the smaller countries in South America, is making an impact on the world and is becoming more noticeable each day. Their efforts in promoting education have received international recognition with an astounding literacy rate of over 95%. It is no surprise that they have a well-educated workforce and hold a high standard of living for its people. Uruguay's stable economy and financial status, as well as its political and labor conditions, provide a great foundation for Chicago's companies wanting to do business. Although impressive, these accomplishments are but a milestone for a leader with bigger plans and a greater vision for his country. And after you listen to him today, I think you will agree that he is on the right path. I think it was best said by our former president, Harry Truman, when he said, "Men make history, and not the other way around. Progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. Chicago is honored by your presidents and honored to welcome this world leader, the President of Uruguay, President Jorge Batlle.
Mrs. Daly, ladies and gentlemen, it's not the first time that I have the pleasure to be in this wonderful city. I arrived here for my first time in 1955, accompanying my father when he was president of Uruguay in times of the presidency of General Dwight Eisenhower. Really, I have the chance to come back several times because I have a friend, a special one, Mr. William McDonough, who used to work here as First National City Bank of Chicago and now is in the Federal Reserve of New York. And really, being with you today is a real honor for Uruguay, and that its president could tell you something about the tiniest country of South America. In doing that in this important club is as older as I am. We are both, the club and I myself, 75 years old. That's something. And I'd like to tell you something about Uruguay. Not because you don't know it, but I think that I must do it. I must, well, give some figures and things about Uruguay. You know that we're on the 35 parallel south with a temperate climate, good spring, good autumn, and even good winter, windy. But you are accustomed to windy weather. You can go there without problem. We are between Brazil and Argentina, and bordered in the estuary of the River Plate and its great rivers. We are only 187 square kilometers with 3.4 million inhabitants, but with 12 million heads of cattle and 11 million heads of sheep, and improving these figures this year. We produce a lot of things: wheat, barley, soybean, sunflower, corn, fruit, honey. We are very strong in dairy products, and we are the second largest producer of wool tops in the world, and the fifth largest exporter of rice, with a production of more than 1 million tons per year on rice, with an average of more than 6,000 kilos per hectare. Who produce wood? Weyerhaeuser, for instance, owns about 250,000 acres of yellow pine. And the Finns are already established in Uruguay. They bought about 70,000 acres of eucalyptus forests, and they're planning to develop a huge pulp plant in the next year. You know that We also export vegetables, fruit, fishery, and even some caviar. We managed to have some Russian, good, original Russian caviar. As you know, we have a very well educational system that started in 1875, and the one who was the leader of the whole evolution was a Uruguayan called Jose Pedro Varela, and he learned to do that in the States. He learns that out of Horace Mann, his lectures and his reports, and Ida Mayhew and Daniel Webster were the teachers, and we started pre-primary, elementary, and nowadays after year 65, secondary, high school, mandatory, and for free. We don't pay to send our children to the school, and the budget, the national budget, comprised the resources for this public education. The public university is also for free, and we have private education with a strong presence in all levels. Life expectancy is above 70. I'm an example of that. For both men and women, always the woman more than us, for sure. Our population grows the same rate of the Germans' population, despite we speak Spanish, and our infant mortality rates are the best in the region, similar to those of the European countries and the US. Our population is mainly of Spanish and Italian origin. Our political institutions were forged in 1813 out of the instructions made by our national hero, Jose Artigas, and the origin of these political institutions were the American Act of Confederation of 1781 and the constitutions of Massachusetts, Connecticut, Virginia, and New Jersey were the source of inspiration for the major and most important principles of our political system, and Thomas Paine's writings were the messenger of those ideas. Uruguay, our public organization in terms of justice is completely free. We have a Supreme Court composed by 5 members elected by the National Assembly, and if they don't get the majority that the Constitution demands, the oldest member of the tribunal goes to the Supreme Court as a member of it, and they nominate the judges. We don't nominate the judges. Politicians don't nominate the judges, and they are completely free to make up his mind and the jurisdictional decisions. Uruguay, along with Argentina, Bolivia, Paraguay, and the Jesuit missions, used to comprise the Spanish colonial viceroyalty of the River Plate. In October 21 of 1805, Lord Nelson defeated on Trafalgar the Spanish and the French fleet to get assembly, and out of this year, the British dominate the seas, and by 1810, in the whole South America, from Mexico to the southern part of it, started our independent movement, our revolution that spread throughout the Americas. Uruguay, in those days, was already with over 1 million heads of cattle on his territory, was a natural port, the deepest port of the whole region, and was the place where the Spanish fleet anchored. And for that, and effectively, it was the place where you can control the access to the River Plate and to the Paraguay and Paraná River. And we were a territory of dispute between the Spanish and the Brazilian and Spanish and Portuguese empires, and after that with the United Province of the River Plate and Brazil, that finished in 1828 with a strong participation of the Great Britain. And we, after these deals signed in Brazil, we became independent in 1830. Our first constitution was started in 1830. From those days, mainly in the second half of the 19th century, we received a strong European immigration, Not only, in those days, for instance, in Montevideo in 1844, the main colony was a French one, and the second one was the Italian one. The Spanish one was very little, because a lot of them went back to Spain because of the independence of those days, and they came back in the early days of the 20th century. But in the 19th century, the vast majority of the people who lives in Uruguay and mainly in Montevideo were from European origin. We don't have many Indians in our territory, and the main part of them were members of the Jesuit colonies, of the Jesuit missions, who deal with the cattle in big farms, not only in our territory, but also in the southern part of Brazil and Paraguay. But if you imagine in this country, in 1868, we have already in Uruguay, made by the British, the public water supply. Nowadays, after 100 years, every part of Uruguay is able to put the machine on and drink public water without hesitation to have any problem with that. They construct 3,000 kilometers of railway. They install the gas and banking and insurances and meat packing plants, and they brought the breeds, the Hereford. We have the biggest Hereford cattle group in the world, and after the sheep, and even in sheep we have the biggest Corriedale amount of heads of pure Corriedale and pure Hereford in the world. We become a country that grows out of this investment, without World Bank, without BID, only with a few Baring Brothers or a few London banks, we received this huge investment. The whole thing was in the whole South America, speaking mainly about the South Cone. We dredged with a British loan our port in those days, in 1902, 30 feet at zero level. We are now dredging it at 36 feet, sufficient for transform Montevideo in the hub port, for the Sealand and for Costco company from China. That means that in those days we have done a lot of things, much more than we have done nowadays. Our grandfathers really were something. And Uruguay grew till the 50s. Till the 50s, in the whole South Cone grew without problems, mainly because we received this huge investment from Europe and from Britain, and also because of the tragedy of the wars. 1914, 1918, 1935, 1944. We were benefited in terms of financial results of the war, of both the wars in World War in Europe. Following the political trends of the epoch, we developed not only a strong democracy with freedom of the press, but also we use these resources to develop a very deep social organization. Even we were considered a welfare state. The state increased the activities too much, I must say, and the crisis is helping us to change the model. But in those days, and even today, we can say that when we try to deal with Americans in terms of bilateral agreement, we start in something that it takes very strong interest in your people, an environmental attitude of the Uruguayans and the social labor laws. And in these two items, I can say that we approve more than 90 of the contracts the International Organization of Workers promote, much more than the Americans. And we can compete with you in social security organization with a chance to have a head finish. And also environmental, we, after a Yale and Columbia University conclusion, we are number 6 in the world after the Finns, the Canadians, the Norwegians, the Sweden and Swiss. But you know, the European post-war policy, after the European agreement, started between Charles de Gaulle and Konrad Adenauer. That makes that the horizon changes very much to all of us. The policy is led by subsidizing and quotas and high tariffs. I can give you an example of that. Today, for instance, the states subsidize rice and sell rice to the Brazilians, our main client. We can compete with the American farmers. We can't compete with American Treasury. It's impossible. It's too big. Europeans, for instance, subsidize butter, milk, cheese. We lost our Venezuelan market because after paying for the milk and for the butter, tremendous prices, local prices, they subsidized the butter price more than 100% of the price of butter in the world market. It's impossible to compete with them in this situation. In the meantime, the gap of science and technology widens for us. And you know what happens with our young people? Well, they are highly capable. We are the country in Uruguay that are the biggest exporter of software. Our exports in terms of software are more than $100 million per year, and bigger than the Brazilian and the Argentinian export in the same field. But the best well-trained and highly capable people, young people, when they don't reach new jobs in Uruguay, well, they try to immigrate to the States, where they are really very successful. And I have a brother who lives in the States happily for the last 20 years, who plays piano, and all his sons and daughters lives and be married here and become already good American citizens. A similar scenario is being observed in Brazil and in Argentina. Within the aggravating circumstances for us that, you know, when Brazil devaluated its currency in 1999, we lost half of the $1 billion of exports to Brazil in a few months. The same thing happens with the Argentine crisis. That was like an earthquake for Uruguay. And out of this crisis, we suffer as much as you don't imagine. We were, for 1 year long, walking over a wire without net. The most important banks of Uruguay collapsed. 40% of our deposits, the majority of them were in the Argentinian deposits, flew. We have had the country's toughest financial crisis in the last 100 years. The crisis was only overcome thanks to the good sense of the Uruguayan people. I think that there are three factors that allowed me to be here with you speaking as a president. First, the good sense of Uruguayan people. Second, the stability of the political system of Uruguay. And third, the invaluable help provided by the government of the states, which supported us with a bridge loan that allowed us to reach an agreement with the IMF that we have scrupulously fulfilled ever since, and we have done over the years without a single exception. Mr. Bush, President Bush, decided to help us in those days, and that's the reason why I can say that we are here. Survivors, because in those days we were completely alone. Completely alone. In 1991, we signed the Treaty of Asunción, creating the Mercosur. We grew in the beginning of this new area of United South Cone nations, no? There were monetary parities in those days, Brazil, Argentina, 1 real, 1 peso, $1. And naturally, deviation of commerce is the consequence of an agreement like that. Successive crises in Brazil and Argentina show the weakness of the system. Growth from exports is only possible when you have an open markets where you can sell the consequences and the attitudes of your people producing and doing things. The idea of the government of Uruguay is to promote open market because commerce was the way that we were born and grew in the past. And I think commerce leads to have a democracy very stable and very strong. Without free commerce, you don't have the chance to grow and to give to your people the quality of life they deserve. I like to finish saying 2 or 3 figures only. In 1996, the Mexican exports were about $29 billion. In 2002, were about $160 billion. In 2002, Brazil exports are about $60,000 billion, and Argentinians 25. That makes 85, half of Mexican exports. Numbers speaks by themselves. In 1991, the former president of the States, George Bush, signed 3 months after the Mercosur agreement what is called the Rose Garden Agreement, 4+1. This instrument was ratified by Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, and Uruguay. During the year of 2000 and 2001, but mainly in the first part of 2001, we spoke with the former Argentinian Minister Cavallo, and we tried to promote again the Rose Garden Agreement. This proposal was formally accepted in Asunción during the 2001 meeting of the countries that are members of the Mercosur, the 4 countries that are members of the Mercosur. What happens nowadays? We are considering the FTAA, the ALCA, Free Trade Agreement for the Americas. In the U.S. vision, the coexistence of these agreements with NAFTA is not only possible, but it is also convenient and desirable. In March this year, US President George Bush informed Congress of his decision to begin free trade negotiations aiming to reach a free trade agreement with Central America before the end of 2003. A bilateral trade agreement is in operation on the move with Chileans and has been recently finalized and will be sent for ratification to the Congress, I hope, shortly. At the President's request, trade preferences were granted by Congress to the Andean countries, those who fought against the cocaine plantations last year. We congratulate the United States for widening the horizons of free trade in our region. However, while all these measures represent undisputable progress for all in the long term, in the short term, by forcing us to compete with exports which have been granted tariff preferences, they have the effect of creating further trade barriers for the introduction of many of our products into the United States market. Since 2000, we have indicated to the United States government our willingness to advance negotiations leading to a free trade between our two nations by any and all means available. Global negotiations through WTO, World Trade Organization, regional negotiations through FTTA, sub-regional negotiations with Mercosur through 4+1 Rose-Garden Agreement, and bilateral through the negotiation of an United States-Uruguayan free trade agreement. Politically, I believe that this is the moment to produce a strong, decisive advances on 4+1 and the Rose-Garden Agreement. Europe decided to include 10 new nations inside its organization, and soon will incorporate several more, even Turkey. You know, we are a continent separated by 2 oceans. There are no more ships who bring immigrants. You see Europe like it is, you can walk from Vladivostok to Portugal. And you walk. Nobody impedes you to walk. 80,000 Ukrainians living in Lisbon. Look at South America and North America. The rich part, the not so rich part. Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean. We all read the same book. We all are members of the same ideals and the same values. This part is very rich. It's very, very rich and was very rich in the 19th and the 20th century. But we lost our contacts with Europe. Now is the moment, the political moment, where we can close the gap, making the 4+1 agreement with the South Cone countries. Next Sunday, there shall be elections with new presidents in Argentina and Paraguay. President Lula is already 3 months in office, 4 months in office this month. I think that they understand that what they need to develop their ideals and their dreams to their country is to fulfill the capacity of them to compete in an open market. The only one with whom we can make an agreement is with the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Why? Because we are already there. We are already there. When you ask somebody of those young people in Uruguay or in Argentina or in Brazil or in Chile or in Bolivia, where you like to go, they say to the States. Where you like to work? You don't have a job in your own country? Where you like to emigrate? To the States. Well, the question is, why not to transport the benefits of this economy to the south part of the South American country? Why not? We can do it so easy. We can grow all together. And if we grow, we can make democracy something stable. Because if we don't grow, the demagogic promises are those who are going to reach power in some of our countries. The consequence of a weak democracy is the open gate to populism and to cheating the people with promises that they never get to accomplish. And that's the time that arrives now. I'm going to tell that next Wednesday to President Bush, because I know he was always trying to do that in the same way he's trying to do that in Central America and helping people from the Andean countries and helping us. I know he liked to make a big common market. That means a big democracy between the north part of this continent and the southern part of this continent. We don't have time to waste. And you, members of this prestigious economic club and members of this wonderful and exemplar town, you have a voice to express in this affair. I'm sure you can do a lot, because you are the consequence of democracy and free market. You are the consequence of that. You grow with that. You grow with good universities that are the origin of the substance of your knowledge and evolvement. You fought for free market in free commerce in your country, and you were able to develop a wonderful civilization to which a lot of us are coming in the way that millions of South Americans and Central Americans are making his life in the States. Why not to translate the benefit, to transport the benefits of this society to the southern part of this continent? It's very easy to do it, and I think the time has arrived to do it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, of course.
Mr. President, thank you very much. That was extraordinarily articulate, and we appreciate your comments. We do have some amount of time to take questions from the floor, and there are the microphones standing by. I will. Do we have one? A question? Yes.
A microphone.
Good. Well,
See,
while you're composing your questions, I'll get us started. Mr. President, one of the things you observed is you are a country that's very strategically situated between Argentina and Brazil, who all each have significant economic problems of their own. What do you see as the prospects for their economic recovery, and how will that bear on what happens in Uruguay?
Well, it's different, completely different situation from Argentina and from Brazil. In terms of financial prospect, Brazil is much more stable and is doing very well. And President Lula is following the same financial attitude that the former President Fernando Henrique Cardoso, and I think that his presence as President of Brazil gives a reliable message to everybody. And Brazil is naturally a huge country, 8 million square kilometers, 170 million inhabitants, with a huge market for himself. But despite he is highly developed in a lot of activities, look at the Embraer airplanes competing with the Canadians, and look at the Lafarge, who is now just working in some areas with the Votorantim, and look at the iron ore industries from Brazil installed already in the States, and look at the citrus industry in Florida, owned by a lot of Brazilians who are already there working as, not as producers of orange in the States. Brazil really has a strong capacity to develop his industries and to compete with that. And I think that we must decide to sit on a table to speak about those differences. Brazil sometimes think that it's too big, the Americans, to compete with them, and the Americans maybe think that the Brazilians can compete with less wages or salaries, and can have a lower cost of production, and can invade the sometimes so protective industries that are those in the States. But there was the same thing with Mexico. Everybody thought that making an arrangement with the Mexicans are going to be something very bad for the American workers. And the same amount of money that the Mexicans import from the Americans import for the Mexicans. Both grow together. That is going to be the same story with Brazil. I think that Brazil is much prepared in this moment to these arrangements. Argentina has financial problems, but Argentina is a country so rich, has everything, oil and gas, and 35 million tons of soybean this year. Together with Brazil, they produce much more than the Americans for the first time in history. It's the biggest producer of sunflower. It's produce a wonderful beef, and produce wonderful Argentinians. They are the very best soccer player, they are the very best dancer in the world, the very best leading philharmonic conductors and actors and everything. Why not they can develop a very steady financial system with the next president? I don't know who is going to be, because, you know, I am half Argentinian, half Uruguayan. My mother was Argentinian. And I like to say to you that being a Uruguayan and being somebody who loves Argentina and who loves Brazil, where I worked for years in the southern part of Brazil, I suppose that the Argentinians are going to choose in the good direction the next president. Maybe the former President Menem, or the second maybe could be Lopez Murphy, and both of them has in different levels good experience. And I think that the Argentinians can manage their problems, their financial problems.
Thank you, sir. Question there? Another one of our pre-submitted questions. Mr. President, Uruguay has been exceedingly supportive of the United States in the current Iraq situation. I wonder if you could comment on perspectives both in Uruguay and elsewhere in South America about the war in Iraq.
Well, you know, the war in Iraq is not something that have the impact that the situation have had in the States. When you are a member of this country and you participate as a common citizen in the, well, tremendous events of the 11th of September, you naturally, you have a point of view that completely different than the one of the common citizens who lives in any country in South America. When you ask people what you think about war, they say, oh no, we love peace. I heard that, I'm old enough to remember, in times of Winston Churchill and Neville Chamberlain. They all love peace in England. And they don't decide to do the things they must do in those times. I can't forget that the American participation leading the coalition that defeated Hitler, after that was a Marshall Plan. They helped the Europeans to reconstruct their economy. They helped the Germans to reconstruct their economy and becoming a democracy, progressive and rich. At the meantime, the other half of Germany lives under dictatorship and poorness. I remember quite well how you helped Japan to create the Japanese democracy after the war and to give the Japanese industry to participate in your market, competing with General Motors and with Ford, doing the same thing with Korea. When you arrive to Washington, you think you are arriving to Rome. But the difference is that Washington never occupied a single part of any part of the world, being the powerful country in the world as it is now. They send the boys there, some of them die, and what they like to do is to come back home. And sometimes people doesn't realize that as much as we old people can express to them. That's the reason why we are here. Yes. You know something? Mr. Tungevicius is a gentleman who was honorary consul of Uruguay and consul of Uruguay in Chicago for 50 years, the whole life. Mr. Tungevicius is right here with us, and I like to present him with a medal, who express our sentiments of gratitude and friendship to Mr. Tungevicius, who is a member of the Chicago Economic Club and design life member of the Chicago Economic Club. We met together with Mr. Tungevicius when I was not a kid, just an old boy, in 1955 here in Chicago with my father, and I know he has something to offer me, and this is something that Mr. Tungevicius received from somebody that represents a lot for the American people and for this state of Illinois and for all the Democrats of the world. Because this special proclamation given from the state of Illinois to Mr. Tungevicius is signed by Governor Adlai Stevenson. Mr. Tungevicius.
Mr. President, thank you very much, and I want to tell you I had permission from Governor Edgar, who was governor later, to present this to you as well.
Oh my
because
God.
he used to do these every year. I showed it to Governor Edgar.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a surprise for him to hear that I'm mentioning him today, but I'm sure it's no news.
Jorge, please accept from the government of Uruguay this medal for you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank
Yeah.
you again for coming to visit us here in Chicago. It was indeed an honor to have you, and as a small symbol of our gratitude, we have a book that collects some of the great speeches and meetings from the Economic Club, and I can assure you in one of the future years, your speech will figure prominently in that issue. So thank you again for coming and being with us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
That concludes our formal meeting. The President has said that he will graciously stay and visit with those of you who have additional questions or want to greet the President. Thanks very, very much.